Good evening, everyone. Welcome to colleagues online, colleagues in the room, and a particular welcome to the Right Worshipful Mayor of Bath, Councillor Rob Appleyard, who is joining us this evening. For those of you who don't know who I am Professor Ian Gadd. I am Chair of the Board of the Bath Royal Literary and Scientific Institution. I am also, by default for these lectures, the Fire Marshal. So should there be an evacuation, in the very unlikely event of one, I will ask you to leave, turn right when you leave, exit from the front door, and we will congregate on the corner of Queen Square and Chapel Row. So on behalf of the institution, I'd like to welcome you to tonight, this third of 6 lectures, part of the World Heritage Series that has been curated and coordinated by Professor Barry Gilbertson. I am not Barry, and Barry is not, alas, in the room with us. He tested positive for COVID this morning. Thankfully, his symptoms are very mild, and due to the wonders of technology, he is joining us online. And so in a few minutes, I will hand over to him to kick off proceedings. I want to start, though, by asking how many of you have been to at least one of the previous 2 lectures? Okay, that's an overwhelming number. Of those who've got your hands up, keep them up if you've been to both of the lectures. Well, that's a very good, that's a good third of the room, I think. First of all, thank you. Welcome to those of you who are coming for the first time. At the risk of sounding like a Marks and Spencer's ad, this is no ordinary lecture series. Partly because one of the things that Barry has tried to do with this series is package it in a way that both allows for the individual portion, the single lecture, but also a more enriching experience for those of you who come to more than one. And that's partly because this isn't just a lecture tonight about Georgian town planning or last week about Georgian architecture or whatever, but rather these are contextualized within Bath's own World Heritage inscription. And so part of the reason that we are very pleased here at the institution to host the lecture or these lectures is that we can, in keeping with the institution's approach from the date it was founded back in 1824, that it allows a space for citizens and visitors to Bath to reflect on their place in the city. And so this lecture, which obviously will look back, also will be framed in a way that I hope will give you a chance to think about your own relationship to the city and its World Heritage status. That does, of course, present Barry in particular with a bit of a challenge, given that some of you have not heard, coming for the first time for this lecture, and many of you have been once or twice before. Barry has the challenge of any academic or teacher in that we need to be able to present the material in a way that works for everybody in the room. And so what we've been pleased to do, and we've responded to feedback from people at the previous lectures, we will be using the evening in a slightly different way. Barry will talk about how that will be structured. You'll hear from Barry, then you'll hear from our speaker. We will have more time for Q&A. We ran out of time last week. We will also make sure that there is more involvement with attendees online who were asking questions last week, but we weren't able to get to them. And so Barry will be an interlocutor for them. Also, and we are still working this out, the technology, the layout here, so people on Zoom now can see the lecture straight on. That means we're slightly, the lectern is slightly altered from where it is normally, but hopefully all of that will work very smoothly. I will now hand over, hopefully, to Barry. Barry, are you with us?
I am, Ian, I am.
I feel like a Victorian medium at that point. Barry, I'm your clicker in chief, so I will give you the floor and the screen, and over to you.
Thank you very much, and good evening. Allow me to add my own welcome to Mr. Mayor. Good evening, Rob. It's great that you're here tonight. And to you, ladies and gentlemen, whether you're in the room or online. You've been staring, I think, at the screen looking from Stall Street, right outside the Stall Street entrance to the Roman Baths, straight the way down Bath Street to the crossbars beyond. And this is a really good spot, actually, for you to think about town planning, because these roads have been in existence since the Georgian era. And when you come to listen to Tim later on, you'll get a much greater feel of it. And when he's talking about the roads and things in Bath, it's great if you can picture them as they may have been in the Georgian era. But clicking on to the next slide brings me to these two tremendous words, architecture and landscape. They seem to me to be the two key words that if you asked people what they like about Bath, many of them, I think, would say the architecture and the fact that it's set in a fabulous landscape. And this was picked up by UNESCO in 1987, when we were granted our first of now 2 World Heritage inscriptions. And on the slide, you will see those words, outstanding universal value. And the whole of this series is based around the 6 attributes of outstanding universal value attributed to Bath in 1987. But if we click on to the next slide, you'll see the agenda for this evening. And my focus at the front end is about moving on from the setting of the World Heritage Site and all the background to UNESCO on towards how we actually manage our World Heritage Site here in Bath. Then comes the star of the show, Professor Tim Mowl, and you can see on the screen his talk title. And Tim will talk for about 75 minutes or so, and then we will have a Q&A, which Ian has already mentioned. And let me say that we will be doing our very best to answer questions that you may have actually as we go along. So save the actual question until the end, please, unless you're online, in which case if you're viewing online, please do enter your questions into the chat so that we can bring them out when we get to the Q&A session. We will eventually, probably during the Easter holidays, be issuing a summary of the questions and answers from the first 3 seminars, and we will later on, at the end of the 3 that follow after Easter, we'll be issuing another set of the questions and answers, just so that everybody gets an opportunity to reflect on the things that come out of that. Now, yes, thank you. The key here is for you to think about when you travel around, whether you travel around in the UK or whether you travel around in Europe or even further afield. I think that if you read what it says on the screen, you'll realize that it's like a hopper in a silo, as all of these wider things narrow down to a focus on just 2 words. That's culture and heritage, as the only remaining differentiators which make Bath stand out from other places around the world. And of course, this also fits in with World Heritage. And why is that so important to us here in Bath? Well, I can tell you that around the world, most travel companies steer their itineraries by World Heritage sites. So if you go to a particular country on a particular tour, the chances are you will visit some or all of the World Heritage sites in that country. And therefore, it's extraordinarily important for Bath that we maintain our World Heritage status. No ifs, no buts. We have to make sure that we retain that status now that we have it. So moving on to the next slide, you'll see this little bit of background. I've just got 2 slides on UNESCO, this one and one more to follow. And look at the quote at the bottom. World Heritage is not a constraint, it's an invitation to excel. And when I tried to find that quote that we use often actually here in Bath, I really struggled to find the person who actually said it for the first time. And Stephen George, who works in the council in planning policy, and may even be in the room this evening, tells me that some time ago, Caroline Kay, who was the then chief executive of the Preservation Trust, told Stephen that actually it was said by Barry Cunliffe, who wrote it on the back of a fag packet. And as a result of that one little phrase on the back of a fag packet, this phrase pops up everywhere, not just in Bath now, but in many World Heritage sites around the world. And this is very much our mantra. It's an invitation to excel. And that's part of the difficulty and the challenge for us in managing the website. And if you look at the next slide, you'll see this symbol. You saw it just now on the front end of the slides, on the floor, in Stall Street. And there are various other places around the city where you will see them. Do keep your eye open for them. And do keep your eye open for them when you're traveling, because they are in 1,158 World Heritage sites around the globe. And as you can see, there's a linkage here between natural and cultural aspects of World Heritage, looking at the different things regarding human skill and inspiration and nature. And even if you can't see the linkage to it, I can tell you that it is well recognized around the world. And now you'll be able to tell your friends you know exactly what it means. So when you start to pick that up and translate that into World Heritage in Bath, we move to the next slide, which at first blush looks complicated. But I hope you'll find that it's not that complicated, really. If you look on the top left-hand corner, you'll see UNESCO's World Heritage Administration, which is based in Paris. And from UNESCO, the responsibility for every World Heritage site is relayed downwards, delegated, if you will, to the government of that particular state party. And in our case, the UK Government Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport is the relevant department. Unfortunately, it doesn't rate very highly in the list of ministers. It doesn't reach the cabinet, I'm afraid, but it also is a proving ground for new ministers. And so in my 6 years doing this volunteer role that I have as chairman, I've lost count of the number of ministers responsible for World Heritage. It's at least one a year. And so we lack that consistency, which can be very frustrating at times. So the government then delegates downwards to the local authority. And in our case, it's Bath and North East Somerset, of course. But if we were in the Jurassic Coast, down in Dorset and Devon, there are, I think, 7 local authorities responsible for the Jurassic Coast World Heritage Site. And if we were in the border between England and Scotland at Hadrian's Wall, I can tell you there are about 12 different local authorities, each with their own separate political mandate and each with their own access to or restricted access to funds. So we count ourselves very lucky that we have a focus from BAMES directly to us. And from that, our council has delegated the responsibility for the World Heritage Site in the only way that it can to a board, in which case we call it the World Heritage Advisory Board. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more how that works in the next few slides. There you can see my role as chairman, and my role is, as I say, a volunteer role. Below that, you can see the World Heritage Enhancement Fund, which could be a subject of a talk all on its own, and quite likely we may do that in one of the 3 talks coming up after Easter. Then, the centre of that, you can see the Bronze Heritage plaques, and we're trying very hard now to set up a civic trust in order to reinvigorate the bronze plaques that you see all around the city. In terms of staffing, we only have 1 full-time member of staff, and you can see Tony Crouch's name there, working for the local authority. And on the outside, you can see our 2 inscriptions. The original one on the left-hand side is the City of Bath from 1987. And the one on the right-hand side is as a leading member of the Great Spa Towns of Europe, which was awarded to us in 2021, and for which we had the presentation of the inscription certificate in March, just 2 or 3 weeks ago. And so as we move on now to how to manage that, if we look at the next slide, and here you can see a range of things. Now, the next few slides have got quite a lot of words on them, and I don't tend to read my slides to you. I hope that you can read them while I'm talking, and often I'll be picking out a line or 2 which is coloured in green. In this case, I wanted to make it clear that the management of our World Heritage Site, along with every other World Heritage Site, is subject to both local, national and international scrutiny, and I'm going to show you how that works again in the next couple of slides. Importantly though, we are part of World Heritage UK. And World Heritage UK is a voluntary organisation, again, which was set up about 8 or 10 years ago now to represent as a lobbying group and a membership group the 33 World Heritage Sites in UK and dependent territories. And I want to just take a moment to recognise Tony Crouch's role in this. Tony Crouch was one of the people who set up World Heritage UK and was chairman for about 4 years, which I think is a tremendous achievement. And it's just fantastic that we have all that knowledge available to us here in Bath. And what we try very hard to do is to exchange information with our other World Heritage Sites in the UK and overseas. And we try to share best practice so that people don't have to reinvent the wheel. And on that topic, if we can blow our own trumpet for a moment or 2, I know that listening in tonight are various representatives of other World Heritage Sites listening online, because they have thought the idea of a series of talks focused on their individual OUVs is going to be of interest. So let's see whether that happens. But what we try to do then is to think about the actual structure of how we manage that. And on the next slide, what you'll see is a lot of names of organisations and people. Now, this may look daunting, and from where you're sitting, I can tell you occasionally from where I'm sitting trying to chair this number of people, that can be quite daunting too. But it is enormously important that we do get together on a regular basis, 3 or 4 times a year. We have the opportunity to bring together key officers for the council who have a responsibility for heritage. And it is fantastic that in the last 6 months, the leader of the council has decided that he wants to look after heritage himself. And so we have a seat at the very top table of the current leader of the council. And around the outside, you will see national, international, and other bodies, as well as local organisations. So we're trying to bring together knowledge and expertise and experience from both the professional world of heritage, but also the volunteer world of heritage too. And when I talk about this, I normally take the opportunity, if I may, and it'll be slightly strange for me to do it online this evening, but I always like to try and mention the Mayor's Guides. Now, there'll be some Mayor's Guides in the audience, I'm quite sure. So if you could just pop your hand up, anybody who is actually a working Mayor's Guide, and I'm just going to ask the audience to give you
about 10 people have done so. 10 or 12, Barry.
10 or 12 people, yes. Thank you. Thanks, Ian. What I'd like the audience to do is to just give you a big round of applause to say thank you for all the work that you do representing our city to the number of visitors that you give free tours during the course of 364 days a year. Is the audience going to give a little round of applause for you?
We did a round of applause while you were finishing that sentence. So,
oh, God, I couldn't hear that, of course. Thank you. Well, and I have to tell you, Mr. Mayor, that I like to do that on a regular basis, not just because you're in the room. I just think it's fantastic what the Mayor's Guides do. And so let's move on to how we try to make all of that advisory board work. So it used to be called a steering group. And when I took over this role in 2017, I couldn't understand why it was called a steering group. It was small, it had about 15 people on it. And for my mind, a steering group is something which you set up at the start of an event, not towards the end, and when it's really up and running. And so I sought permission and we changed the name to the advisory board, not if for various reasons, but also to give it some real clout locally. And one of the things we have to do, and we are working on at the moment, is a management plan, a 6-year management plan. And we also have to think about things like the climate emergency and the rugby club stadium proposals. Those two things are going to be the biggest things in front of us when we rewrite the management plan. So let's move on quickly to the next slide. And you'll see on this slide the sort of things that we have to think about when trying to draft a management plan. And every World Heritage Site around the world has to have a 6-year management plan. And it has to be adopted by their local supporting local authority. And it has then to be submitted to UNESCO. Now, just note those words in green at the bottom of the page as we turn over to the next slide, please. And there you can see the 5 priorities and other important issues. And I rather doubt if anybody could disagree with those 5 priorities. You might wish to expand them a little, but all of those 5 remain important. These came from the 2016 to 22 plan, and they're going to feature very highly going forward, as will those other issues on the right-hand side. But as you can see, we have had 17 objectives covered by 47 actions, but a World Heritage Site has no executive powers. It's not a council. And so we have to think about how we can influence people to excel as a World Heritage Site rather than force them to do so. So moving on now, please, to the last couple of slides here, which is the management plan is not the local council's local plan in planning terms. Please do not mix them up. We're going to try and write a document which is for digital production rather than hard copy. That will reduce the cost, but also make it a lot easier to digest, particularly when we go out to public consultation. Next slide, please. And this is one of the key reasons why Bath is so special, because it is only one of 2 cities, strangely both inscribed in 1987, where the whole city is the World Heritage Site. And if we move on now to that I can show you on there. The red line is the line of the city council as it was in 1987, showing the whole city inscribed as a World Heritage Site. And then you have these attributes of outstanding universal value. Every World Heritage Site has to have at least one. Many have two. Quite a lot of World Heritage Sites have three, but very few have six. And Bath has six, and it is those six that we've based our talks on during the course of this series. You can see the top three, all in capital letters. They're the ones that have gone as talks numbers 1, 2, and 3. Tonight we have Georgian town planning. And then after Easter, starting on Wednesday the 19th, we have the hot springs, followed by 18th century social ambition, and then lastly, the green setting of the city. And I'm going to show you one photograph of each. So quickly then on to the head of Sulis Minerva for the Roman Archeology OUV, outstanding universal value, found in 1727 when digging a sewer trench in Stall Street. Next. Here's the hot springs. Do you know there are only 3 hot springs in the UK, and all 3 of them are in Bath. And that's another very good reason why these hot springs are important to us in World Heritage terms, as they flow out of the ground at about 1 million litres a day at 45 degrees centigrade. And then you move on to the fabulous Georgian architecture. And if you were fortunate to be with us last week, you will have heard a tremendous talk by Amy Frost, who talked about the absolute elegance of this architecture. But when you look at the next slide and look down on the Royal Crescent, and you think about how difficult it was in 1766, not just to conceive a crescent of this shape, when there had been no crescents ever built in this country before, but to do so on the rising ground, moving up from the river up towards Lansdowne without a JCB in sight. And all the earth movement was by hand. And then moving on again to 18th century social ambition. And this is about why people came to Bath in the winter season. And we're going to hear from Professor Elaine Chalice, who is an absolute expert on this stuff. But if I can put it in context, you can see the people here outside North Parade, looking up at the countryside, but basically socialising as a good way of trying to move their family further up the greasy pole towards richness and nobility. And then lastly, we have the green setting of the city, which I talked about before, and isn't it just beautiful to see that? And when you see that from the city, we can look up and see the trees and the countryside almost all around us, you realise why people came to Bath in the winter. Because Bath has its own microclimate caused by this bowl of hills, and that keeps it warmer in winter than elsewhere. Not tremendously warmer, but a lot less frost and certainly not very much snow. And so we move on to the topic for this evening, which is Georgian town planning. And I'm going to ask Tim to take over in a moment once I've actually introduced him to you. But for the moment, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to say thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening tonight. So, if I go to the next...
Hold on, Barry, just applauding.
Over to you.
Thank you very much. So here's Tim. Here's his latest book. Absolutely fascinating, I have to tell you. And he's going to be talking somewhat about that this evening. You'll recognise, if you look beyond the figure at the shape in the background, you'll see that pop up in the talk. And on the left-hand side, you can see the sort of stuff that Tim is actually famous for. All this stuff He actually is a tremendous speaker, and I know you're going to enjoy and learn from Professor Tim Mowl. Let's give him a big round of applause in welcome.
Thank you. And thank you very much, Barry, for that very warm introduction. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for, oh, hang on. Hello, everyone online. I'll keep looking at you. I will. Thank you all for coming out, particularly when it's awful weather. Not as bad as last week, was it? It was pouring last week. Now, can you all hear me? Can you all see me? Yeah. This is a complicated lecture. Not for you, for me. But I think we'll get through it and it'll be fun. Now, let's see if we can get some slides going. Yeah, okay. The important criteria of the outstanding universal value for us to consider tonight is Criterion 2, which concerns the 18th century town planning of Bath, beginning in 1727 with John Wood the Elder's return to the city from Yorkshire, the achievement of his urban set pieces up to his death in 1754, and the continuing development of the city to the north and the east afterwards. I want to read this criterion. It's quite short. Don't worry, I won't be doing lots of reading. Most of this will be ad lib, but this is very, very important. Okay? Okay? I keep looking at you. Bath exemplifies the 18th century move away from the inward-looking uniform street layouts of Renaissance cities that dominated through the 15th to the 17th centuries, towards the idea of planting buildings and cities in the landscape to achieve picturesque views and forms which could be seen echoed around Europe, particularly in the 19th century. This unifying of nature and city seen throughout Bath is perhaps best demonstrated in the Royal Crescent and Lansdowne Crescent. Bath's urban and landscape spaces are created by the buildings that enclose them, providing a series of interlinked spaces that flow organically and that visually and at times physically draw in the green surrounding countryside to create a distinctive garden city feel, looking forward to the principles of garden cities developed by the 19th century town planners. Now, you all got that? Yep. Well, in this analysis this evening of John Wood's obsession behind his town planning, I'll argue that the Criterion has got it wrong, completely wrong. Bath was never a garden city, and Wood's early civic spaces consciously turned their backs on the wider landscape. It was only with the rise of landscape tourism in the 1770s and the influence of the picturesque aesthetic that later Bath architects began to respond to nature, and that's post-Crescent, not pre-Crescent. So I'm going to be talking tonight about John Wood's obsessions and how it created the Georgian city, and it's nothing to do with Criteria 2. So I think the first thing we've got to do is probably rewrite the criteria. Okay? Have you woken up now? Yeah. Right. I'm showing you this slide particularly because this does work with landscape and buildings. But remember, everything you're seeing there is post John Wood's death in 1754. Okay. Now we got through that, we can start moving. Oh, yeah. John Wood's a black hole. We haven't really got much idea about him at all before he comes back to Bath in 1727. And those of you who know Bath well, and I'm sure you all do, it wasn't until 1954 that we worked out that he was actually born in Bath. And that was John Summerson's great essay for his bicentenary, 1704, 1754, yeah, 200 years. And when I came to Bath in the 1980s to work for the Bath Preservation Trust, I couldn't believe this, that nobody in Bath really thought that he was a Bathonian until 1954. And also, most people in Bath didn't understand the city at all and his obsessions that had created the city. And that's why I wrote the first book, which was 1988. And then I decided, as a sort of swan song, last year to revamp it. And this is the last copy. So if anybody wants it, it's 200 quid, okay? We did a short print run. Is the Toppings bookshop man here? We put it up too high. He was naughty. Okay, so John Wood's on the right, next to Robert Gay, as in Gay Street. Ralph Allen on the left, the man that really ran Bath in the early 18th century. And then Richard Jones, a rather strange clerk of works that worked with Ralph Allen at Prior Park after Allen dismissed Wood. I mean, the problem about Wood is he had lots of brilliant ideas and the corporations stopped him from doing most of them. And we'll come to quite a lot of them later on. This is painted probably in the townhouse, Ralph Allen's townhouse. And the thing I want to make clear right at the beginning here is that not only did Wood write his own obituary, May 1754, but in that obituary, he calls himself an antiquary and an architect. An antiquary and an architect. And that's the key to what we're going to talk about tonight. The other thing he says is that he's the restorer of Bath. And I set out to try and find out what he thought he was restoring. Not what I believed he was restoring, but what he believed he was restoring. Now, you'll hear a lot of very strange things this evening, and they're all Wood. They're not me. Okay? When this book came out, it was reviewed by John Summerson in the broadsheets, and they said, thank God Tim Mowl doesn't believe all this, because it's a farrago of nonsense, and that's what's created your city. I call it your city because I don't live here anymore. Right. Okay, next one. I was talking about this black hole. We think that John Wood was working in London, in the London developments, particularly around Grosvenor Square, but we're not sure. The History of Bath Research Group has been doing some brilliant work on Wood, and we're finding out more and more about him, possibly, but we're not sure. I mean, I thought that he was building a house in Oxford Street when he was 19, and it may be that that's not our John Wood. But if it is, and of course most of his big set pieces are done very early in his career, he's not John Wood the elder. He's John Wood the younger, in a sense, before John Wood the younger. He's the Chatterton and Mozart of architects. He's young and he creates most of his great set pieces before he's even 30. So think about that when we think about him as being a geriatric architect. I'm not going to use the pointer because people online can't see it. So I have to spend a bit more time explaining the slides, okay? But I'll go as quickly as I can. This is the stable block at Bramham in Yorkshire. It's the centrepiece we're interested in, not the two wings. We think he did that, but we're not sure. But it's nascent Palladianism. It's not very well understood. As soon as he comes to Bath, he knows what he's doing. And I think he learned his Palladianism in Yorkshire, at Bramham with Lord Bingley, Robert Benson. I think that's where he got his Freemasonry, because Freemasonry is another really key obsession for this evening, okay? So we've got Druids we're going to come to, we've got Palladianism, and we've got Freemasonry. Think about those three things. And I think his town planning starts with garden design. On the bottom is a plan by a drawing by Wood, that's all Wood's writing, for an aqueduct to take water to a great reservoir in the landscape at Bramham. And again, I'm going to have to explain to you where it was. This is John Wood's plan of Bramham, 1731. So we know he did this plan. If you look very carefully, it's difficult for you to see, but on the right-hand side, there is a T-shaped canal. I don't know whether you can see the T-shaped canal. Coming from the T-shaped canal, there is a sort of ravine. And the aqueduct was to go over that ravine to bring a spring into the great reservoir, which is the T-shaped canal, okay? But take a look at the wilderness on the left. I hope you can all see it online. It's that very heavily, densely vegetated area, lots of trees. And it has 3 circles in it. Now, these are obviously glades, ronds-points within that wilderness. We can't claim that Wood designed that wilderness. but I've spotted something that you will see later on that more or less proves that he did that wilderness. So if we're thinking about Wood being a young architect trying to make his way in the London building trade, and also currying favour with quite a lot of really important aristocrats, one of which is Robert Benson, Lord Bingley, it would seem as though landscape design is also part of him coming back to Bath and trying to develop town planning. The two other people he seems to have met in London are Edward Harley, the Earl of Oxford, and Harley was really interested in antiquities, fascinated by antiquities, and the last one is the Duke of Chandos. And the Duke of Chandos is a bit of a sort of poison chalice, really, because he's the one that gave Wood all the trouble at St John's Hospital. I hope you all go into St John's Hospital because it's where Bath started in the 18th century. Are you all still with me? Online? Okay? Right. I'm getting dry. So take a look at this then. Oh, we haven't got any. There's no good drinking if you haven't got any water. On the left is a landscape that I'm sure Wood would have known because it's at Amesbury Abbey, which is quite close to Salisbury, and in the area of these three important antiquities. We've got Avebury, Stonehenge, and I'm going to talk to you about Stanton Drew. But that's a Bridgeman layout. Charles Bridgeman's the key player, really, in the early 18th century development of landscape. And if you look at his landscape on the left, it's all geometric. The whole thing is a geometry landscape. And that's what I think Bath is all about in Wood's time. I will point, well, I can't point out with a pointer, but those of you online, look at the top and you'll see two rond-points. And just below on the edge, you'll see a semicircular walk, a crescent walk. And below that, an amphitheatre. And one of the keys to Bridgeman's design are these amphitheatres. He's really interested in amphitheatres. And on the right, you see a very beautiful, I can't remember the artist, probably Tillemans, anyway, amphitheatre at Claremont in Surrey. I'm not suggesting Wood knew that, but Wood went to London regularly. And you can see we have the semicircular form, okay? So geometry, semicircular, Bridgeman. What's Wood looking at? We need to know what he's looking at. Remember, he doesn't go abroad. He doesn't see anything abroad. He sees things through books, but that's about it. But look at this. Take a look at that and have a think about it for a bit. This is the great layout at Stowe, Lord Cobham's brilliant garden, political, iconographic garden. And this is it around about 1736, 37. Again, I hope you can see this. In the middle of it, there is a long canal. And at the end of the canal, there is a stepped amphitheatre, about 3 levels. I hope you can see that. I hope you can see it online. Oh, goodness me, I'm sounding like that bloke who does the House of Games. Sorry. What's his name? Richard. But look at the octagonal basin. Okay? Remember it. The octagonal basin on the right of the slide. So Wood would have known this landscape because everybody did. It was the most important landscape at the time. But what did Bath look like when he came back here in 1727? Well, he'd already from Yorkshire asked for a plan of Bath in 1725, but comes back in 27. And I'm just going to orientate you. We're looking at the Holloway and the Magdalen Chapel. And then we're going over the Old Bridge, and then we're going into Southgate, and that wonderful Southgate Centre that was built recently and probably should be demolished. And then we go into the medieval city with its Saxon street plan, and can you see it's all walled, and we had all the gates. Now this dates from 1723, and it's a book written by William Stuteley, and I'm going to talk about Stuteley in a minute. On the right is a wooded area. Can you see it on the right? And that's the Abbey Orchard and the Ham. And that's going to feature quite largely in this talk because that's an undeveloped part of Bath that Wood had his eye on all the time to develop. And on the left, on the left where you see the walls and you see those trees and those fields, that's the Ambery. And that's where Wood wanted to build the mineral water hospital originally. But you can see it's a medieval walled city with all its gates. It's ripe for development. Also, Wood thought he wanted to rebuild the whole of the medieval city and rebuild the baths and lay it all out completely afresh. We don't know quite what he wanted to do, but that's what he wanted to do. And of course, one of the problems is that Wood fell foul of the corporation all the time, and he had to do all his developments outside the city walls, which is why we have the upper town. Is this all making sense? Yeah. Right. Where's some specs? We won't dwell too much on this because it's exactly what you've just seen, but that's the plan. There's only two areas outside the city walls that have been developed. One is, of course, by the old bridge at Southgate, and one is by St. Michael's at the top, you know, where Rossex's is now. But the only street that's outside the walls at this time is Trim Street. That's the first new 18th century development. The rest of it's all virgin land. And below, above Trim Street is the Barton Fields, where Queen Square was built eventually. So Wood basically has to go out rather than in. And just a little bit on what Bath looked like. This is Thomas Robbins, 1747, of the King's Bath. And this shows you the new pump room on the left, which was done by Harvey in 1705 to 6. But all of the buildings around are all Cotswold vernacular, is what we call them. Mullioned windows, gables, rather sort of rough stonework. But what's important is that everybody is looking in. They're not looking out, they're looking in. It's all inward looking. And the reason being, of course, is if when you came to Bath, you wanted everybody to know you were here, you wanted to see and be seen and make a match and do your gambling, all that sort of thing. It's an inward looking insular town. It's not outward looking. Okay. So what does Wood do? Comes back in 27, decides that he's going to make deals with Ralph Allen because he owns all the quarries. Sorry, I shouldn't be doing that. And he does this piece of Palladian classicism. Now, this is really important, okay? Keep with me here. This is really important architecturally. And Amy touched upon this last week. John Wood's Palladianism is really very little to do with Palladio, and it's very little to do with the 18th century revival of Palladianism in the metropolitan centre. So people like Isaac Ware, Lord Burlington, William Kent, and so on, they had a completely different brand of Palladianism, and it's very stripped down and austere. Now, what is Wood's Palladianism? Because he's obviously trained as an architect. Why is it different? And I argue that it's different because it's Bath, and it's to do with the locality as opposed to metropolitan manners. And I'll come back to that, but it's really important. And so you see his Palladianism is defined by lots and lots of detail, those swags particularly, and the detail in the pediment, but also it's defined by a squeezing of too much in too small a space. You got that? That's really important. Okay, next one. That's what it looked like when it was first built. Now, Wood has to work out the street plan for Bath. And he does it at the St. John's Hospital. There's the cross bath and there's St. John's Hospital. But you can see it's a sort of cliff face of rather bad rubble. It has a hierarchy of windows that you get in a Palladian building, but it's pretty rough and pretty awful. So what he does, he spends more money on the inner face. This is the Phillips House in the St. John's complex. And this is basically Bath. This is what happened in Bath. It starts here in around about 1729, 1730. But it starts here with him trying to be a builder and making a complete pig's ear of it. Absolute pig's ear. Duke of Chandos owns the land. It's a hospital that needs rebuilding. And he wants these 2 floors of rooms for genteel people to come to Bath. But he's got to keep the almswomen in the bottom rank. You got that? So you've got the almswomen on the bottom, and you've got these 2 floors of lodgings rooms above. So Wood creates a plat band, a sill band, a piano nobile, and a chamber floor. Yeah, forget about the roof because that's later. And he does that, and the Duke of Chandos is delighted, and it's right close to the crossbar. But there's a problem. Wood's forgotten to put a staircase in. So Chandos says, well, where's the staircase? And says, so I know. I'm going to make one of the windows a bit wider. Can you see the window that's a bit wider? I'll make that a door. And then I'll do a flying staircase in wood into the courtyard. Now, if you look very carefully, you can see there's a line on the right across the stonework. Can you see just a line? Well, that's a line of the staircase. And what happened to the staircase in the first frosts? It collapsed. So these people that were coming to Bath, very genteel, not only didn't they have a staircase, they had a staircase that collapsed. So that was the first problem. And the second problem was the flushing water closets. The Duke of Chandos wanted flushing water closets in all of the rooms. And I've seen the specification that Wood laid down for this. And he said the soil pipe should be boards of wood nailed together. So, of course, they all exploded, didn't they? So he said, Duke of Chandos comes down from London and says, oh, God. All right, put necessaries in the yard. So he designed necessaries in the yard. Necessary, you've got to go, it's necessary, okay? 6 holes in a building with no partition walls. And this is for genteel people coming to Bath. So it's a complete nightmare, St. John's Hospital, but it gave us Bath because he realized he couldn't be a builder. He couldn't hack it. He'd be a developer. He'd become an architect, and he would get people to build to his design, and they would have to do it in 18 months, and that's how Bath was created, all because of his taradiddle at St. John's Hospital. So we've got to get back to the Druids. So basically what I've laid out is this is what he did, this is where he came, this is how he made his, he didn't make any money, this is how he made his deals. But how then do you design a new city? And I would argue that it's all to do with his absolute obsession with bladdered. Now, I don't want to teach you like children. I certainly don't. But you all know the bladdered legend, don't you? Yes? Okay. And we know that bladdered is pre-Roman, he's Celtic. And he's in the baths, as you can see on the left. That statue was probably put up in the 1620s. 1620s. The inscription underneath it is 1672. And on the right is bladdered from, he's obviously speaking to us in blue. He's obviously swearing. This is bladdered from John Wood's essay towards the description of Bath, which was published in 1749. So when Wood comes back to Bath, Bath is bladdered's town, okay? It's not a Georgian city. It's not even a Roman city. It's bladdered's city. The local folklore is really, really important. And the legend of bladdered, being the swineherd and leprosy and so on, is really important to Wood. Oh, right, bladdered. Okay. Bladdered's a Celtic British prince who was exiled from the British court because he got leprosy. And he decided, well, he didn't decide, he came to Bath and he found the sacred springs and the pigs that he was looking after because he became a swineherd, frolicked in the water and got fantastic complexions. And he did the same and he was cured of his leprosy. So he's let back into the British court. That's the legend, okay? Swine, important, and also the fact that, you know, he's a great prince, a great Celtic prince. He's also thought to be a Druid. And that's where we'll come to the Druids later on. Are we all with that? Yeah, okay. Now, in this drawing by Wood for his essay on Bath, can you see just by his right foot, there's a big temple? And can you see it's a circular temple with a pedimented portico? That's Delphi. Wood believed that Bladdered had actually built Delphi. Now, can you see what I mean about you've got to believe Wood, but not me, okay? His big rival, William Stukeley, who I'm going to come to now, called it the fabulous whimsies of Wood's cracked imagination. That's Bath. And you're all part of it. I'm not looking at my notes, but it's going all right, isn't it? Yep. Okay, next one. Now, when I was doing this book, I thought, well, I'm going to have a look at the antiquities around Bath, because if he sees himself as an antiquary as well as an architect, they've got to be important. And very few people go there. It's Stanton Drew. John Wood thought it was Stone Town of the Druids, Stanton Drew, but Wood actually thought there was a university of the Druids there. So it's really important, okay? Much more important than Stonehenge and Avebury, but this is Wood. Remember, this is who we're with tonight. And this is a drawing by Stukely, William Stukely, Wood's great rival. William Stukely was an antiquary, a very good one. He'd surveyed Stonehenge and Avebury. He'd gone to Stanton Drew in 1723, but he didn't publish his findings until posthumously 1777. So Wood could see straight away that if he concentrated on Stanton Drew and not on Avebury and Stonehenge, he could steal a march on Stukely, who was a big rival. So this is why Stanton Drew is really, really important to us tonight and working out about Bath. How many of you have been to Stanton Drew? Oh, you're a good audience. Barry, that was about half the audience. How about that? Okay. Isn't it lovely? There's a good pub there as well. Now, Stanton Drew, as Stukely saw it, had three circles, stone circles, one to the sun, one to the moon, and one to the earth. And can you see there's a big one in the middle and a slightly bigger one to the right, and then a very small one down to the left? Have you got all that? Okay. Now, the dimensions of the circle on the right, circle D, are really important. And there it is. Oh, it's a beautiful site. It really is. Nobody ever goes there, really. And it's near, you know, Chew Valley Lake. It's, you know, if you're going to fly off to somewhere you shouldn't be flying off to ecologically, you go past it at Bristol Airport. Okay? And there's Avebury, just to remind you about how important Wessex is to Wood, but also to us in terms of antiquities. And there's Stonehenge. Just a little bit about Stonehenge before we go on. There are 30 stones in that circle, Stonehenge, and it has a particularly interesting diameter. I'm not telling you that yet. Okay. So what has Wood done by 1735? Well, this is Wood's plan of Bath in 1735. And it's typical of Wood. I always think he's rather like Toad. You know, pop, pop. He just, you know, I'll get through anything. Yeah, just like Toad. Can you see Queen Square on top right? Can you see Queen Square is about 3 times as big as the Abbey and the Baths? But that's Wood for you. He's like that. Not backward in coming forward. What I want you to concentrate on at the moment is that area in the fold of the river below Terrace Walk, which has those what look like allotments. Can you see that? And they are the Ham and the Abbey Orchard. And that's obviously virgin land that he could do something on because it's outside the walls. On the right of that, on the apex of that, is the weir with the Monk's Mill where Pulteney Bridge is now. So you orientated, are you? You've got it all? You all got it all online? Right, okay. Now, I need to move on from this, but can you see that it's incredibly detailed in its annotation? And one of the annotations is fascinating because it says that this number, whatever the number is on the map, is the Guildhall. And it says there's a really curious head in the Guildhall, and it's the head of Apollo. Can you remember that? Yeah, remember that. I read a lot of crime thrillers, so that's why I'm lecturing like I'm lecturing. I'm reading one at the moment all about, lid and Dungeness. Fantastic. Now, this is going to be very difficult for people online, but it's very important for us all. Here is Wood's first plan for a circular building. This obsession he's got with circular buildings because of the Druids and prehistory. At the top of the slide is Terrace Walk, what is rather delightfully known today as Bog Island. All right? And from that, you've got a road that comes right the way down, and that would be North Parade, and the Grand Parade to the left of it. Are you all with me? So on the right of it, that triangular bit is Parade Gardens. Okay. Superimposed upon that is a circle. And there's one road going into it from Terrace Walk. There's one road going out of it to the river. And there's another road going south, as if it was going to Manvers Street, the railway. If you inscribed those three entrances in a geometric figure, you'd get a triangle. But it's a particular type of triangle. It's an isosceles triangle. Now, the diameter of that circle is 260 feet. That's important. So this is his first attempt at doing a circular range of building on the Ham and the Abbey Garden, the Abbey Orchard. And it didn't get anywhere, 1730. Remember what I told you about the corporation? Awful, awful. I mean, Smollett, who wrote about Wood, because he knew Wood very well, he said if only the corporation had let him do half of the things he wanted to do, Bath would have been the wonder of the world. That's Smollett, knowing just how many schemes that Wood wanted to do that the corporation wouldn't let him. Next one. Yeah. And this is one of the great schemes that never got off the ground. It's exactly the same area we've just been looking at, but this time it's Wood going imperial megalomaniac. This is his Royal Forum, and the Royal Forum would have canalised the river into an octagonal basin. Remember the Stowe design? And on either side of the river, going all the way down to the railway station, would have been ranges of building. And this is where people would come and do commerce. And there would be a marina. That's a marina, effectively, that octagon. Now, look at all the buildings. All of the buildings look in. They don't look out. He's not interested in landscape at all in terms of views. All he wants is for people to congregate in the space and look at each other and meet each other and talk to each other. It's nothing to do with the wider landscape. Now let's have a look at what happened. Of course, the Forum scheme didn't find any backers and he didn't get it done. This is Robin's absolutely delightful slide, painting of this area. So you can see North Parade, or the Grand Parade. You can see people promenading on the Grand Parade. There's Parade Gardens, which is just open, open land. There's Harrison's Walks, where people are walking and looking across to the landscape. And on the bottom right is Spring Gardens, and that's an incredibly rare painting. Spring Gardens. We don't really know what Spring Gardens looks like, but that gives you some idea. And you see that the only space inside the city that does look out is the orange grove. Now, this is interesting, and there'll be people in the audience who know much more about me, but as I recollect it, there were ranges of buildings at the bottom of Orange Grove that were blocking the view. I might be wrong, but it doesn't matter particularly because Orange Grove is a 16th, 17th century space. It's nothing to do with Georgian planning. But it was the hub of Bath and where you bought all your souvenirs. So Wood has to do a section of the Forum in the parades, and that's all he manages to do. But what he's interested in doing is designing, again, geometrically, a very interesting layout in the gardens, at Parade Gardens. And let's look again at that geometrically. It's a circle and another circle, and 1, 2, 3 roads or paths into it, and then 1, 2, 3 little sort of, you know, exedra places. Have you all got that? Well, if you line all those up geometrically, you get a Star of David. Have you all understood that? Because it's quite important. Star of David. So line them all up geometrically, and you get a Star of David within a circle. Now, at the same time he was designing this, and of course this never happened either, he was working in Herefordshire for, hang on, let me look at my notes. Where are we? Oh, we're moving on. That's good. A church, Reredos, at a place called Tiverton in Herefordshire. He was working for William Bridges, who was a kinsman of the Duke of Chandos. So that's the connection. And this Reredos, which he calls an altar, has symbols of Christ's passion carved on it, but it also has that, which again, I've never ever seen in a Christian church. And let's try and decode it. It's a circle with a triangle and a sun in the middle. Now, the circle is created by an Ouroboros, and an Ouroboros is a snake biting its tail, and a snake biting its tail, which is a symbol of eternity because it's constant regeneration. Again, really important for us later on in the lecture. Now, what about Queen Square? Well, Queen Square's got nothing to do with the Druids. It was laid out very much rather like Grosvenor Square in London, but because Wood was in charge of all the building leases, we get the uniformity, particularly on the North Palace facade. This side had the 3 villas. We're in what would have been a detached villa set back, and then you get the east and the south side, which again are uniform. Now, I'm going to get annoyed here. I really am going to get annoyed. There is apparently this bronze plaque thing, isn't there, that Barry was telling us about. They have got the plaque for John Wood at number 20, the big palace facade. John Wood didn't live at number 20. He lived in number 6, 7, and 8, the Francis Hotel. Now, I wrote an article in the Chronicle about this in 1989 saying, for goodness sake, let's get him right. And it's now, what, 2000 and, I don't know, what are we now, 2023. It really annoys me. Wood created your city, and we don't even tell tourists where he lived. It really infuriates me. The other thing that's quite exciting about the South Facade, and there's the Francis Hotel, is that the most traumatic thing in Wood's life happened in that parlour in the Piano Nobile above that door in 1730, was it 3? Maybe 34. He had a governess, which he rather coyly calls Sylvia. Her name was Fanny Braddock. And she was a gambler, and her paramour was a gambler, and he went to death's prison. And she got terribly upset, and Wood comes back and finds that she's hanged herself on the back of the door in her parlour. He also talks about how he goes up onto the roof of Queen Square with Sylvia to look at the moon through his telescopes. So I think it was a very interesting relationship he might have had with his governess. He had, 3, 4 children. But you see, it's such a wonderful story. And it all happened on the South Facade, and we don't even know he lived there. So whoever's in charge of that committee, Barry, get it sorted. Oh, it's like being back in 1989, isn't it? Writing those Chronicle articles. Oh, I've been reading some of them recently. They're good. But I'd never get away with any of them today. So back to the Druids again. I think the trauma of her death might have pushed him, because his seals for his letters before that period are Caesar's heads. Sometimes it's a tree, but they're mostly Caesar's heads. And then suddenly we get this on the left, which you can see is a wild man with a club and an oak spray of acorns in his right hand. Druids, of course, sacrifice in oak groves, so that's what that's about. And it's also a tree, and it's an oak tree, and that's a rebus for wood, wood, tree, wood. And then on the right, there is a chevron or a set square and crescent moons. And here is his book plate, and it's got the same detail in it. So there is obviously a Druidic significance of this. I've got to tell you to read David Crellin's article in the Bath History of Bath Research Group, because he's done a lot of work on seals. Brilliant article. David's not in the audience, is he? No. Right, next one. So 1720s, we have this big upsurge in interest in Druidism and also Freemasonry. 1720s is a really key decade in the 18th century for forming people's ideas about what they want to do. And these are both by Stukely. This is the British Druid on the left from his book on Stonehenge, and on the right is Stonehenge with, you know, a Druid doing what Druids do. I've never been to the solstice, even though it's my birthday. I should really, shouldn't I? So big push on Druidism in the 1720s. And the man behind it all, of course, is William Stukely on the left. He's the secretary of the Society of Antiquaries, which, as you know, is in Burlington House. He's the one who talks about the fabulous whimsies of Wood's cracked imagination. So he's big rival with Wood. On the right is Inigo Jones, who's a big hero figure of Wood, not a rival. And that's very typical of Wood. Inigo Jones has been dead for over 100 years, so it's great, isn't it? You can have a hero who's dead, but you have a rival who's living. Now, why is Inigo Jones important? Well, he's important because he surveys Stonehenge. And he does a book, it's published posthumously, on Stonehenge. And in the book, there is a plan. Are you all still with me? Yeah. I'm a bit thirsty. Hang on. Take a look at the plan. So, what can you see that you've seen before? Circle, 30 stones. Ooh, 3 entrances in at the very point where, ooh, Gay Street, Bennett Street. Oh, yeah. Now, this is a fiction. Wood, Jones didn't think it was a fiction, but Wood did. He knew it was a fiction, but it was very much in his mind, this idea of having a circular building with 3 entrances on that line. Now let's line up those entrances and we get a triangle. And of course, what do we get? We get an equilateral triangle, not an isosceles. So we're looking for a circle and an equilateral triangle. Okay. Now this is Wood's book on Stonehenge called Cargar. And as you can see, there are 30 stones. They're numbered. But there's no entrances at the points that we've just seen. And then we go back to Stanton Drew. How does this all tie in with Stanton Drew? Well, he works out that Stanton Drew's circle D has a specific diameter. And the specific diameter is 318 feet. And 318 feet equates to 60 Jewish cubits. And when we look at the stone circles at Stanton Drew, we've got a little one and a big one and a slightly bigger one in a rather interesting alignment. And then we look back at the plan for the landscape wilderness at Bramham, and we've got 3 in almost the same configuration, we just turned around. So my contention is, and I don't write about this in the book, it's just come out of doing this lecture for you, is that he must have remembered those 3 glades and the alignment of them. And he remembered them from Stanton Drew. But did he in fact design them? Because he knew Stanton Drew. Because he didn't come back to Bath in 1727 from Yorkshire. He was born in Bath and knew the area because he was interested in antiquities. Yeah? You believe me, don't you? Oh. Right. Well, how can I go back? It doesn't seem to go back, Ian. Oh, yes, it does. Now, this is the very contentious bit. Barry, in his introduction, talked about this head, and I'm sure you all know this head because it's in the Roman baths. And this is the head that was found in Stall Street and Sewer, as Barry said, in 1727. Now, when it was first found, the Scottish antiquary did that lovely sketch of it on the left. He did that on site as soon as it was found. And that Latin inscription at the bottom says head. It doesn't say Apollo. It doesn't say Minerva. It doesn't say anything other than head. Now, for a long time, that's all it was known as, the head. I looked at this, and I looked at Wood's map of Bath that you've seen, and he says quite clearly that this head is Apollo on that map, and it's in the Guildhall at that point. Now, of course, it's been argued that this is the head of Minerva, and that there was a temple to Sulis Minerva in the precinct, and Sulis is the Celtic river god, or, water god, and Minerva is the Roman god, and you put the two together and you get Sulis Minerva. And there would have been a statue of Minerva in that temple. Aha! There's also a temple to Apollo. And Wood knew that there was a temple to Apollo. And he was convinced that this head was Apollo. And that leads us to why he then wanted to do temples to Apollo, the sun, upon Lansdowne. And there it is. So this is a temple to, if we're looking at Celtic gods, this is a temple to Bel, and the Crescent as a moon temple would be a temple to Onca. So Onca's moon, Bel is Celtic for sun. Now, again, I've got to take issue with the criteria. This is a very stony space. It's no landscape at all. Those trees weren't put there until the 1790s. They should probably all come out. We should chainsaw all those trees in Queen Square. Queen Square originally had espaliers of limes and elms that were 4 foot high, and that's all it was. No railings, and there was a balustrade, and that's what it should have. Take all the trees out, get it back to stony, and that's fine. We can leave a bit for the Petonk people, but, let's get it. We're a World Heritage place. Come on. Just imagine if this was Williamsburg. Williamsburg was built afresh from about 3 bricks. We've got it there. Let's put it right. Again, I wrote a Chronicle article about that, and I had 89 letters the next week, all saying I should be lynched. People, they're so conservative. And look, you can see glimpses of the landscape, but it is an internal view. Now, lovely Amy was talking about the orders here, and the fact that the orders are rather odd because there are 3 of them, Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, and they're all of the same height. And of course, the orders are not all of the same height. They're all of different heights and different proportions. So why is Wood, who's trained as an architect, we think, doing this? There's got to be a reason for it. The other thing is, what is going on in the Doric frieze, and why are there acorns on the top and not flaming urns or whatever? Okay, got those 3. Well, it's Inigo Jones again. You go back to Inigo Jones, and Inigo Jones, who is the great architect who Wood believed had a Bath mother and had built the Guildhall, the old Guildhall in Bath. So he's really important to Wood and to Bath, so Wood thinks. And here we have the great banqueting house where Charles I got donged. And it's 2 orders, and they're of the same height. Again, this is something that a Palladian architect shouldn't be doing. Can you see the swags as well at the top? And that relates to Wood's brand of Palladianism. So Wood's brand of Palladianism is really 17th century rather than 18th century, and very local. But there's another reason why there are 3 columns all of the same height, and that is because the inner temple of Solomon's temple, this is Cyrus's temple, had the Holy of Holies with the curtain, which is where the Ark of the Covenant was, and then on the sides you have colonnades for 3 columns the same height. Now, if you're a fervent Freemason, Solomon's temple is a key building for you. You all know about Freemasons. Do you want half a minute on Freemasons? Moses goes up to Sinai and gets the 10 Commandments, comes down from Sinai, and he's got to put them in something. So God tells him to build the tabernacle in the wilderness. Tabernacle in the wilderness is a cube with a pyramidal roof. If you've been to Claverton Church and you've seen Ralph Allen's monument, it's a cube with a pyramidal roof. He's a Freemason. Yeah? Okay. Then you have the first temple, then you have the second temple. And in the heart of the temples, the Holy of Holies, and that's where the Ark of the Covenant that's got the 10 Commandments goes. and there is your sacrificial courtyard on the outside. Does that all make sense? Yeah, okay. So this is a really important building for Freemasons, and you've got 3 tiers of the orders of the same height. How are we doing? How are we doing? Now, if my contention's right, and this is a sun temple, and the crescent is a moon temple, the Doric frieze should really have a crescent moon and a sun, and there they are, just by Gay Street. You got that? Right, this is where I have to show you a book. It's all very interactive tonight, isn't it? Oh, this is going to be my last stat chess. I'm not going to do any more after this. Actually, I've got to do one in Winchester, and then I'm finished. Okay, next one. Next one? Yeah. Now, where do all these emblems on the Doric frieze come from? Well, they come from this book. And it's a 1633 book. I've got a facsimile. And it's effectively... Oh, I shouldn't have done that. It's effectively a horoscope. So what you do is you get to the back page, and the back page has 2... Can you all see that? Yeah? Has 2 circular dials, and you spin the first one, you get a page, and you spin the one below, and you get a part of the book. And you go to that part of the book, and you find that there is an emblem and 30 lines of poetry. Sorry, I'm being pedantic. 30 lines of poetry, okay? Rubbish poetry. All done by this guy, George Wither. And all of the emblems in here, or lots of them, are on the circus. So it's nothing to do with whoever lived in the first house and whether they were teachers, because there's a blackboard and there's Aesop's fables and so on. It's all of them out of this book. And the only thing I can suggest is this book was a parlour game that the Woods used to play. And when the father had died, that's where they took all the images from. I'll leave it out there and you can look at it later if you want to. I mean, isn't it fortuitous research? I was working on this book when I came to Bath to work for the Bath Preservation Trust, and I desperately needed this to check out all of them. And I found it in a bookshop in Bristol. Amazing. It's a scholar, I think it's a Scholar Press thing. Okay. Now, there's a bookplate again, and the connection, of course, with Wither, we don't know whether there was any familial connection, but if you look at Wither's coat of arms, it's crescent moon and the chevron, and there's the crescent moons and the chevron. So he's nicked it. John Wood, by the way, never bore arms. You know, he didn't go to the Corridor of Hells to get arms. You know, he's a charlatan to the end. We love him, though. And there is the compass. Now, if you're a Freemason, compass is really important in Freemasonic law. And also, God is a great architect, so that's why you have the compasses. And there is the compass from Wither's emblems. And then the way to get around the book is through that dial, as I showed you, which is people blowing, winds blowing, and there it is on the circus. It's all there. It's all there. A great scholar, American scholar, Charles Brownell, had sorted a lot of this out. Not all of it, but quite a lot of it. He did a very good thesis on Wood. So what happened to Wood? He dies of chronic asthma. He lays the foundation stone in March 1754, and he's dead by May, and writes his own obituary. Brilliant, isn't it? I'm going to do mine as well. And his son has to finish the circus and then the crescent. Now, why do I say this is the elder Wood? It's because Smollett says the elder Wood planned a circus and projected a crescent. So it was always the intention of the elder Wood to do a crescent. But was it the elder Wood's intention to do a crescent that was open to the landscape in terms of the OUV criteria? No. He wanted a crescent because it would reflect the beach and cliff, which he calls a kind of crescent. So it's geometry reflecting geometry in the natural landscape. It does, however, embrace the landscape. And once the picturesque aesthetic kicks in the 1770s, then everybody starts to look at landscape, and that's where the upper town and the upper town is right and picturesque. But we're talking picturesque with a big P. We're talking about the aesthetic not with a small c, which is pretty. It's the aesthetic that's important. And, you know, if anybody's rewriting this criteria, they need to talk about the aesthetic. It's a terrible building, by the way, the Crescent. Anyway, we can't go into that. Well, it's too big for its bottom. Those columns are far too heavy and big for the podium. The podium needs rustication. It needs some solidity. Amy talked about that last week, didn't she? The podium being strong. And of course, where's the middle? Oh, it's where Andrew Brownsword lives. Oh, is it? Oh, I don't know. You can't see. There's nothing in the middle. There's a wonderful scheme for this, to put an enormous portico in the middle. And I'm going to put it in my next book. I must tell you about my next book. One last thing before we move on to latter things. There's the circus, there's the Crescent, and there's Gay Street. What I can't do is get an aerial shot of Queen Square in it. But if you look at me online, as well as here, you've got the circus, Gay Street, Queen Square. It's a key. And in the 18th century, Freemasons' aprons had three emblems on them. Sun, crescent moon, key. That's not in the book. Okay. So once Wood has done this, and the younger Wood has built the Crescent, we then need to look at areas that are going to be developed, hopefully influenced by the two Woods. The first area is the Pulteney estate, and here is Pulteney Bridge that was designed by Robert Adam, finished in the 1770s, and that opened up the Bathwick estate, the Pulteney estate. And Robert Adam did some schemes for that estate. And as you can see, they're very, very similar to the New Town in Edinburgh, we'll come to in a minute. So we've got octagons, hexagons, rond-points. He's very keen on oval shapes. And these are two of the designs that never happened for Pulteney. How about that? Isn't that extraordinary? This is a Robert Adam scheme for the Pulteney estate, looking out to the river. Not quite sure where it is. They don't seem to know where it is, but I reckon it's by the Beezer Maze or by the wreck, you know, looking that way, because it's got to be that side of the river. But isn't it extraordinary? It's a double crescent. How about that one? This is Repton, or as I call him, Uriah Heep. He's so humble. And this is for the South Parade, below South Parade, again, looking at the river. And I want to just read you this because it's really quite important. Where are we? I've left my notes. Where are we? By building on the ground opposite the South Parade and keeping the coach roads on a level below the walks and parades. So this segregation. And everybody looking at one another, not really looking at the landscape. Because remember, that's what Bath's all about. You've all read your Jane Austen, you know what you're talking about. But isn't that extraordinary? And it's like St. Peter's. That on the right, you can see the Great Crescent on the right. That is an open colonnade with building behind it. An open colonnade that you just walk around, just like St. Peter's. Oh, and how about this one? This is there. This is a guy called James Lewis who was working on that scheme with Repton for Lord Newark, who owned the Ham, of course. And he decided that he was going to completely rebuild Queen Square. And so the three villas, and we're in the middle of the three villas on the west side, was going to be a crescent. He's going to demolish all of those. And then he thought, oh, I'm going to rebuild the North Palace facade. Now, if you look at that and you look at the North Palace facade, the North Palace facade is only a fifth of what you're seeing. So that building would have gone right the way over Gay Street, right the way through Jollies, and would have hit Milsom Street. Isn't that amazing? That's in the next book. Oh, and we're coming now to the upper presence, which you all know. But they wouldn't have been there. As Barry said at the beginning, nobody had done a semicircular building before, and here we have these fantastic upper terraces. So we got Camden Crescent, probably, I think, the best thing in Bath, Lansdowne Crescent, in terms of landscape and building. I mean, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And then I put this in specially for Barry, because Barry lives there. This is one of those crescents that was had a hiatus because of a bank crash in 1793. And so various parts of it weren't built. People went bankrupt. And in fact, numbers 1, 2, and 3 were never built. And number 4 was only built in 2018 to 19. And I think Barry lives in one of those. But anyway, you know, he lives along there. And then you've got this beautiful Widcombe Crescent by Charles Harcourt Masters, about 1805. And Masters, interestingly, did another crescent in Cheltenham. And this is 1805 to 25, took a long time to build. And this is now wrecked by the bus station in Cheltenham, but Cheltenham's wrecked most of its places. I wrote a book called Cheltenham Betrayed a long time ago. Brilliant book. Only took 5 minutes to write because it was another building, bomb, bomb, get rid of them. And this looked out to the Cotswold Hills. So this really did embrace the landscape. Cavendish, Edinburgh New Town. Can you see all the circuses and the half crescents and the ovals and everything? All of this post-Bath, and couldn't have been built without Wood. Wood the Elder having masterminded it. And that's a Royal Circus at Edinburgh by Robert Adam. And then Buxton. Buxton's interesting. There was a spa development, began about 1779. It's the 5th Duke of Devonshire at Chatsworth behind it. He wanted to make Buxton a second Bath. And the crescent was built close to the original St Anne's Well at the foot of St Anne's Cliff. In April 1780, it was begun, finished in 90. It's very, very small compared to the Royal Crescent in Bath, which is semi-elliptical, whereas Buxton is semicircular. So semi-elliptical in Bath, semicircular in Buxton. Interesting, it contained a variety of accommodation, shops, lodgings, and 2 hotels. That's probably what we should have done in Bath. And I'm sure even St Harris had it in his mind, Wood and the Crescent, when he designed this in the 1930s. It wasn't finished till 52. And, you know, George Ferguson decided to change its name to City Hall, didn't he? I used to live in Bristol for a long time. But there's no doubt about the influence of Wood here at Bristol. I thought you'd like this one. This is that Patrick Abercrombie, who did a plan for Bath in 1945, where he wanted to demolish loads of stuff and build brilliant, brilliant set pieces. And one of the things he wanted to do is make the Crescent into a civic centre. So you've got a building behind, which is a civic building that connects to the Crescent. And then on the other side, that's Julian Road, and it was going to be a dual carriageway. And look at the church. I can't remember the name of the church. St Andrews. Can you see it's on a traffic island? Can you see that online? Yeah. Sorry, I keep forgetting you. Oh. Now, when I was an angry young man and I wrote all these scurrilous articles in the Chronicle, do any of you remember any of those? No? Yes? Some of you? We're all old, aren't we? We're getting old. Anyway, 1989, 1991. And this is an article I wrote then about David Brain's design for a new classical crescent. Who's the Tears for Fears guy? Kurt, whatever his name is. Anyway, that's where he lived. And they wanted to build this on the site. And in 1990, I said, brave new design that's no South Fork imitation. That's Fergie, you know, Fergie and the Duke of York, because they were building that awful house in Windsor, like South Fork Mansion. And an ecstatic welcome for a second classical coming. And this is what happens in Bath. That was one of the earliest classical revival buildings to be given to the planners, and it took 11 years to build. And one of the reasons, one, is because it was classicism, and the other reason was because there were 3 trees they were going to lose. It's all true. It's all true. There it is. Combe Royal, upon Bathwick on the right. It's all right, but, you know, David is a good architect, but it persists. Oh, no. And then Edward Nash, who's a really, really good architect who's recently retired, he he's done a lot of housing at St. Martin's Hospital, you know, up on Odd Down, in semicircular form, which I didn't have time to put into the lecture, but I wanted to mention him because he's a really, really interesting architect. Did Circus Mews, lots of other architecture in Bath, but the St. Martin's domestic buildings are really worth looking at. Now, we're finished. Why are we coming back here? Well, that's because when I first came to Bath, one, he wasn't in the Abbey. Why wasn't John Wood in the Abbey? Two, why did nobody know where he lived? Three, why wasn't there a statue to him? And four, what the dickens was he doing in Swainswick Parish Church? He was underneath three small carpets and two pews. And I pulled them all off and got into real trouble with the church warden. And I said, I've got to find him. And, you know, at that time, they didn't know he was there. Well, they knew he was there, but only a few people. And I found him in the floor. He's just had his ledger stone beautifully, beautifully restored. They're great people at Swainswick. And there it is on the right, Johannes Wood Armigeri Sepulchrum. Well, he's not an Armigeri. He's not an arm bearer because he didn't have a coat of arms. He made it up. Typical. But why is he buried at Swainswick? And it's very simple. Swainswick Church is built on the very site where Bladud, who rather like a Somerset Icarus, decided to launch himself from Salisbury Hill, the sun again, and crashed to pieces on Swainswick Parish Church site. So if John Wood saw himself as the second restorer, or the restorer of Bath, a Druidic civilization that never existed, then what better than actually be buried right next to him? And that's why he's in Swainswick Parish Church. Hurrah, we finished.